Hello and welcome to the CNBC TV 18 special. I am Farah Bukwala Vora, and on this show I bring you some of the biggest and most decisive voices from the global hospitality industry. On the sidelines of the Hotel Investment Conference South Asia 2017, which was recently held in Mumbai, I spoke to Mr. Christopher J. Nassetta, the President and CEO of Hilton Worldwide, Mr. Mark Hoplamazian, the President and CEO of Hyatt Corporation, who was also joined by Mr. Peter Fulton, the Group President for Europe, Africa, Middle East and Southwest Asia for Hyatt Corporation, as well as Mr. Rajiv Menon, the Chief Operating Officer for the Asia-Pacific region, excluding Greater China, for Marriott International. My discussion with them spanned three broad areas. One, the recent Supreme Court verdict banning the sale of liquor around state and national highways. Two, the implementation of the goods and services tax with effect from July this year. And three, their individual expansion plans in this high-growth market. In this particular segment, let's listen in to how they view the Supreme Court's ruling to ban the sale of liquor, a move essentially made to curb drink driving along state and national highways.
It is obviously very recent. I read about it as I was flying over a couple of days ago, so we're still trying to, assess the impact from the standpoint of our business. We think, in terms of our hotels being within that radius, it's very limited impact. But, I think time will tell. As an overarching matter, I think the underpinning of what they're trying to accomplish is a good thing, which is the safety and security of Indian people. So I applaud that effort. I think exactly how you do that, my guess is, as a consequence of the ruling, over the coming weeks, more likely months and years, I think there's likely going to be some review and adjustments to it to make sure that while keeping people safe and secure is a good and noble thing to do, that, to make sure that there aren't unintended consequences. But the truth is, it's not for me as an American flying in for a week in India on this recent news without the benefit of having really done a lot of thinking and research on it to judge it. My sense is that ultimately India embraces travel and tourism as a key driver of economic growth and jobs growth and training and development of its people, and I think that undercurrent, if you will, of the Indian culture and the current administration's view of how to continue to create economic prosperity and jobs will ultimately override the day-to-day nuances of particular regulations.
So you are clarifying that this ruling will not alter your expansion plans in the country?
This ruling will not alter our expansion program in India. We are very committed to India in the long term.
Very early days. So I would say it's quite early to know how this is ultimately going to play out. I think the underlying motivation, which is safety and security, is something that everyone can understand and also agree with. You want to have a safe environment in which you're conducting business and serving people, and so that remains a high priority for us as well. But the way in which the recent ruling is actually implemented and how the interpretations work over time, I think it's a bit premature to know what the implications might be.
Mr. Fulton, if I may ask you that it's early days yet, I understand that, but have you been able to assess the financial impact, if any, on the Hyatt Corporation or your operations in India?
So you used the magic words. It's early days, the apex court. There's reports in the press about different interpretations of the ruling. It's a wait-and-see approach. Patience, we've learned over 34 years, is a principal asset for everybody to have in India as these things are worked through the regulatory system. Okay, so how many properties have been impacted by this ruling, if I may ask you? I don't have the exact number. Okay. There is some discrepancies in the interpretation of what is a state highway. Okay. We're going through that at the present time. There is a couple that we're aware of.
We believe that the judgment is to some extent being misconstrued from a hotel industry point of view. Okay. It was really, it has the right meaning for a right cause, but hotels are just being penalized maybe for the wrong reason. And to some extent, the judgment is not necessarily against the hotels per se. So we are working with the government, with the officials to, one, continue to clarify and work together in figuring out ways of how we can get the hotels necessarily to be excluded from this particular ambit. And we are reasonably confident that working as an industry and as a company ourselves, we should be able to achieve that in coming days and weeks, basically.
So does your argument stem from the fact that hotels in and around the state and national highways in fact do not permit the takeaway of liquor? Is that the basis of the argument?
That is one of the arguments.
Okay.
In terms of what the court ruling was driven against, to protect against people driving on highway and the accidents and so on and so forth, I think the hotel industry has, at least from major brands' perspective, we have in the past and we continue to serve responsibly, but also the mere fact that you pointed out that we don't necessarily allow takeaway is an important factor for us to be excluded.
Since the time the Supreme Court ruling has come into play, how has this really impacted properties in India? Is there a specific count on the number of properties impacted by this judgment? And what has been the financial impact on the Marriott Group in India?
So to me, we've had a few hotels that have been impacted. In many cases, some of these hotels are actually in locations which are were deemed as highways but are not necessarily highways, and we are working with state officials in declassifying some of these highways, and that work is still in progress. And from my perspective, if this lasts for a long period of time, yes, there will be considerable impact, which could then result in job losses. For now, we genuinely believe that this is a short-term challenge.
It's time for us to take a short break now. Do stay tuned. We'll continue this conversation on the other side. Welcome back. You're watching this CNBC TV 18 special. Now, the upcoming goods and service tax, which becomes effective from July, will bring sweeping changes to India's taxation regime, and industries across the board will be impacted by this. India's hospitality sector will be no different. As we continue our conversations with the chief executives of the Hilton, Hyatt and Marriott Group, we try and understand from them how they see GST impacting the hospitality sector in India and the implications it could have for the sector. Let's listen in to that conversation.
One, having a consistent approach across the entire country is very good, and having transparency is very good. I think if you look at any historical perspective of other countries around the world, the more that they've had consistency and transparency, the better that it's been for growth in the economy. So I think it's quite positive.
I would say that at a generalized level, there's been a clear movement towards having reporting, both for tax purposes and other regulatory purposes, become much more transparent and available online and in a digitized format. And I think that the essence of the GST is really leading to a simplified approach to how what is currently a number of different taxes or different frameworks are currently operating.
And we have a very complicated tax structure across all the different states in India. This is going to take it back to a level playing field. From a consumer's perspective, it's going to be very clear to understand what is that rate you're actually paying or how much you're paying for something, and we don't have these multi-page invoices where different levels of taxes and so forth that are in there. So I think that's going to be extremely positive.
I have belief that GST will have considerable positive impact in the industry across the board. We've seen it in other countries around the world. It's one tax versus a number of taxes that have in the past been levied on customers in different states, and they vary from state to state and cause considerable amount of confusion. GST will clarify all of that. Now, the discussions we are engaged with as a broader industry with the government is the actual percentage,
Right.
And that is still being worked through.
The general consensus is that the hotel industry could be looking at a GST rate of about 18%. Although, as you point out, the final rate is yet to be decided. Do you believe that the rate of 18% is an ideal rate for the industry?
We believe, looking at the industry, the potential growth, tourism as one of the key focus areas for the Prime Minister, and the potential it has in creating jobs, that we should really be focused on GST that's in the range of 12 to 15%, where possible, because that's when it'll help the industry from a long-term perspective to thrive and create those job opportunities for millions of Indians that are coming out of schools every year.
It's time for another break now. Do keep watching to know how the Hilton, Hyatt and the Marriott group of hotels are looking to rapidly increase their presence in the Indian market. Welcome back. You're watching the CNBC TV 18 special. Now, India may be a small market today for the Hilton, Hyatt and Marriott group of hotels. But the country, with its exploding middle class, rising disposable incomes, as well as growing inflow of tourists, is becoming a significant and strategic market for these companies. In this particular segment, the three hotel majors tell us how they are laying out a massive expansion blueprint in the country.
Hilton has a long history in India, but a relatively small presence in India given the scale. We have 5,000 hotels in the world with 1.2 plus billion people here. We only have 16 hotels up and operating. We have another 18 in our pipeline. We've had fits and starts, honestly, in our business in India, but I'm here to tell you there'll be no more fits.
I was going to ask you that because your projection was about 50 hotels by 2016. And time and again, you've been quoted as saying that India is a rather strategic market. What were some of the key challenges that sort of altered this plan?
I think we got a slow start, and when we had a great goal of having 50 hotels by now, but the fact of the matter is, in the end, we're about serving customers well, and what we discovered is that in order to get there, we weren't going to do it by having the right hotels in the right locations with the right partners.
Hilton is present in India with 5 key brands. Would you look at bringing any of your other brands in your global portfolio, which has about 14, to India? Could we look at Waldorf Astoria or probably a Canopy or a Tapestry?
I think what we want to do is get those 5 right. I mean, it's not unusual. I think the big opportunities for us are really always to start with the core Hilton flag, because that's the most recognized hotel brand in the world. We also want to have luxury. India is a great luxury market, but it's a relatively limited luxury market.
Correct.
We will ultimately, I think, have Waldorf Astoria here. I talked to an owner this morning about a Waldorf Astoria opportunity, but I think first and foremost in the luxury segment, given we have a start with Conrad, we think that that makes the most sense. We'll ultimately, like everywhere else in the world, be the bulk of our growth. If you think about numbers of hotels, will be in the mid-market. And our big engines of growth in the mid-market all around the world are Hilton Garden Inn and the Hampton by Hilton. I'd say in the next 5 to 10 years, we want to have 100 hotels. Product and service to our customers.
So all the hotels that would be coming up in India would be management contracts?
Would be management contracts or franchise, a combination.
Okay.
We have over time looked at ways in which we can grow in a very deliberate way. That is our approach. We're not trying to be the biggest hotel company in proliferation, but rather be where our guests are traveling the most.
Could you lay out the specifics of that expansion plan for us, like in terms of the number of hotels that could be coming up and across what brands? Also, more specifically, you've got 6 brands in India, but would you look at bringing some of your other brands from your portfolio, because you have about 13 globally?
Yeah, there's no question. I believe that many of our other brands that are not present here, I think Ziva and Zilara, which are all-inclusive resort brands, do have a place in India. I also think that we have a collection brand known as the Unbound Collection by Hyatt.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I believe that the Unbound Collection actually has a number of different opportunities in India.
So 34 years is a long time. And we've seen a lot of development in 34 years, from 1 hotel to 26, and that to double up to 52 by I think about 2025.
In India, you are an operator in terms of having both owned properties as well as management contracts as well as franchise agreements, and it's a healthy mix of both. Do you think that this combination of having an asset-led model combined with management contracts and franchise is perhaps the best formula for growth?
Well, just to be clear, we don't really have an asset-led activity. It's really have one joint venture that has 3 hotels out of the 26 that we operate.
Right.
So it's really quite modest in terms of our total presence. And at this point, I don't really believe that we're going to be expanding our ownership base as much as we are. All of the projects that we mentioned earlier, the additional 26 hotels that we will bring into India, are all under contract with third-party owners.
Is the inorganic route an area of focus for the Hyatt Corporation?
Well, we have made acquisitions in the past of selected brands and portfolios of hotels. And we continue to be conscious of what opportunities might exist in the world. The fact is that we as a company are very focused on a high-end traveler cohort of customers. And so really that's the thing that will inform what we might look at in the future, is really looking at how we might expand that base of high-end customers and how we can serve them better and more differentially over time. So the answer is we will continue to keep our eyes open.
From my perspective, we have 84 hotels existing today, operating. This year itself, we will cross the 100 mark in terms of operating hotels, and over the next 3 to 5 years, we would be targeting around 200 hotels in India.
So you have about 15 brands in India, as you mentioned, both under the Marriott and the erstwhile Starwood brand as well. Are you looking at bringing any of your international brands that do not exist currently in India, probably to India as you look for further expansion in this market?
So we're not close to bringing additional brands into the market. We do believe that our existing portfolio of brands has considerable opportunity for further growth, but we do see opportunities as we assess them, as our feasibility teams go into the market, review opportunities. If we see a right fit from one of the other 15 brands that Marriott has that are currently not represented in India, we would definitely bring those brands. So brands, for example, like Moxie.
What about these 15 brands that currently are represented in India? Which amongst these would be your focus brands, rather to speak?
From our perspective as a company, we see opportunities across the board. Where we would see additional opportunities is in brands that are in the mid-market and moderate price tier range, because as we extensively expand into secondary and tertiary markets, you typically would not put a luxury brand in that market. You typically go in with either a Courtyard by Marriott or a 4 Points by Sheraton, or a Westin, or a Sheraton, or a Marriott.
Could you help us understand how India stacks up in the larger scheme of things for Marriott International? What is the contribution of India to global revenues? And over the next 3 to 5 years, as you look to scale up to about 200 hotels out here, how do you see that contribution evolve?
So today, when you look at it, India with 84 operating hotels, on a global scale, we operate almost 6,000 hotels. So the numbers are small. But when you look at the growth in India, it is double-digit numbers year after year. India is shifted gears a little bit. If you ask me 2 years, 3 years ago, our economy here was sluggish, to say the best. There was considerable supply in the market. Those dynamics have now changed. So we genuinely believe that the next 3 to 5 year cycle in India will be quite robust, which then would demonstrate at least high double-digit growth numbers when we look at it year-on-year growth.
With that, it's a wrap on the CNBC TV 18 special. Thank you so much for watching.